welcome. This is Camille Grant here from Mayfield. We're so pleased today to have our next speaker in our lineup of podcasts. Today, we're focusing on generative AI, and we have just an expert here, Ekta Chopra, who is the Chief Digital Officer at E.L.F. Beauty, famous platform, really taken off over the last few years, sort of the who's who of the beauty sector. Ekta, welcome to the podcast. Really glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me, Camille. I'm glad to be here and really excited to talk about Gen AI, the talk of the town.
The talk of the town, yes. But let's dive in. I mean, you really bring an expertise here from an operator perspective. You've got your hands deep in it. You've been a digital officer for a while. Maybe just spend a minute talking about your background and how you got to the position where you are now, the Chief Digital Officer for a major B2C brand.
Yeah. So I was born in technology. So I was a tech geek from the beginning. But I had the opportunity to really work in many different domains from, aerospace to private equity to women's fashion accessories to reporting into a chief investment officer for a foundation to landing my dream job at E.L.F. Beauty, which truly has been just simply like a rocket ship. And that's how we like to, call ourselves. We're sort of on this rocket ship with a lot of superheroes doing some really amazing things. So moved away, pivoted a bit from technology, just technology transformation to more digital transformation, in an era where e-commerce was really pivoting from tech to digital. And that's something that I've been able to embrace and really grow at E.L.F. So yeah, that's in a nutshell my journey.
So maybe with your experience and that background, you could put a little context around generative AI. While it seems like the great new idea here, you've had a long journey working digital strategy. You mentioned the rocket ship evolution of E.L.F. How does this all sort of fit together? I mean, put it into context. It isn't necessarily a brand new thing. It's an evolution of technologies, right?
Absolutely. What I would say is, to be precise, because I've been doing what we call power up sessions at E.L.F., like to educate the whole company. And 1956 is when generative AI was born, essentially. It has had over the time many evolutions. So AI has been there for a long time. ChatGPT just made it very accessible in 2020 to where we are today, which is almost seems like, every conference, every, boardroom, every investor is thinking about it, to where I do think that this is an evolution, right? And not a revolution, but an evolution. And honestly, right now is the time to you have a way to really embrace it, because it is something that I see has a lot of potential from a consumer lens, which
Yeah.
is very near and dear to my heart. But then as a public company, also thinking about how to think about it from an employee efficiency and employee experience, I think it has tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like it's getting a higher priority for you and your business. Maybe you could speak to where does it fit in the prioritization? You mentioned, public level equity position of the company. Of course, you're getting looked at by Wall Street. You got productivity opportunities. I'm sure your board, your CEO and leadership is asking for more things. How high priority is it?
It's really high priority for us, but I would say that we have already been doing a flavor of it. So if you think about our digital business is doing extremely well year over year. E.L.F. has had 18 consecutive growth quarters. We're the number one favorite Gen Z brand. And you don't become number one favorite Gen Z brand unless you really understand your consumer. So
Yeah.
that comes with offering, really personalized experiences. But AI will allow me to offer hyper personalization, which I'm really excited about, right? E.L.F. is for every eye, lip, face, and skin concern. And if I think about that and put it in perspective, the amount of creative, the brand messaging, the content that you need is exponential. How do
Yeah.
you do that? Humanly is not possible
Hmm.
without hiring a bunch of folks. So how do you do that effectively with either co-pilots or, for your everyday content, really having a content supply chain that's driven by AI, right? So
Right.
I think
Right.
that's where I feel like huge opportunity from a productivity perspective and really engaging your consumers. So that's been our focus area, as I think about sort of our journey and acceleration.
So talk a little bit about the journey and maybe some early learnings, or what have you experienced in the effort? I mean, I think what you just described is, as you point out, sort of the evolution, having more and more data, getting closer and closer to your customer, understanding their needs, et cetera. But what are some of the early learnings in your effort to make some of that happen?
Yeah, I think the early learnings really are you have to be grounded in reality. There is, of course, all the excitement and the innovation that's been possible since 2020 now. But I think there is also the grounded in reality of us being a public company. So if I think about our focus areas and how the learnings have shaped them is leveraging sort of this concept of prompt engineering, but making and it's all around education, getting everyone in the company comfortable with
Hmm.
co-piloting with AI is
Hmm.
really important, right? Like if they don't know how to ask the right questions or prompts, they're not going to get the results, and you're not going to be able to train the AI the way you want it to on your brand voice, tone, your own persona as an employee, right? So that's number one, educating and getting our employees really trained on it.
Hmm.
Second is Microsoft, whether it be Slack, whether it be Salesforce, everybody's coming out with co-pilots. Test and learn. Why don't we
Yeah.
work with existing vendors to
Hmm.
be the guinea pig in some cases? And we don't mind that, because as long as they are trusted vendors, walled, and we are being mindful of what use cases we're using them for. Third is we are looking at sort of this fundamental decision as a tech leader or digital leader, like buy versus build, right? Where does it make sense to plug in some of the platforms that are already built
Yeah.
for certain use cases
Yeah.
versus, I think about data and like our consumer data. And really, if one of my goals is, why do you need data analysts, right?
Hmm.
Like, why can't you have something where you're putting, access to our data in the fingertips of different people that they need it for, and really drive action, as
Hmm.
quickly as possible. So I think that's where sort of, building comes in, is because it's our proprietary data.
Hmm.
And the third is like, there's just not one model. You have Llama,
Hmm.
you have Bison, you have
Yep.
OpenAI.
Yep.
Each one is trained and needs to be trained differently. So, and will probably generate some different answers or, use cases too. So how do you like play around in that sandbox? And lastly, AI governance and security enhancements are critical. If you cannot be not thinking about them, especially as an enterprise leader. So I think it's grounded in those realities and learnings that, there are things where we'll go deep and things where we'll just tip our toe a little bit just to test and learn.
Yeah, yeah. On the test and learn thing, I have to call out the image that's up over your shoulder here, the broken glass of too much is a mistake. Is this sort of a concept of keep the learning on and don't be too perfect and everything, or how do you think about that?
100%. E.L.F is an 19-year-old brand, and we started selling $1 makeup online in 2004. So imagine,
Well,
like,
yeah,
people were
yeah.
Facebook was just starting, right? So for us, testing and learning is in our DNA, and
Hmm.
it's really important that we move quickly. How do you, as a retailer or as a brand, sometimes you tend to like live in like, oh no, this is too risky. For us, it's like, it's okay, get it out there. It doesn't have to be perfect. There'll be learnings and you evolve it over time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that concept is in our DNA.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's got a lot of hype, but how will you measure success? I mean, what are some of the metrics? And you've got both internal productivity opportunities, I suppose. And I'm curious how you think about that. And then you've got consumer brand and of course customer adoption and all of that. So what are the unique sort of metrics that generative AI are creating for you?
Yeah, I think it falls into three buckets. One is, what impact is it having on our business? And that could have from increased revenue, new revenue streams, reducing cost of how you serve or your consumer and things like that, improve consumer experience through implementation of the very common use case of chatbots, right? So there are sort of like impact to your business, which is very real and quantifiable. Then there is sort of technical feasibility. Is it really technically feasible? Is it costing you too much, as
Hmm.
you try to build these use cases? So you have to also take that technical feasibility into consideration. And I think the third is availability of data. Do you have the necessary, data models that you've trained to get solutions that are actually making an impact, right? So you
Yep.
have to be able to measure. We have many use cases right now that we're trying out, and some of them, frankly, don't even make sense. That's not even an AI use case, in some
Mm.
cases we said. So I think it's about evaluating, where and measuring where it actually is the juice worth the squeeze, as we like to call it, So it really falls into those buckets. Of course, there's many more, but I would just categorize them in those three
Yeah,
buckets.
those are great strategic ones. So you've spent some time in the space. You mentioned some of the big vendors, Microsoft, Slack, et cetera. You also mentioned some of the models. What are some of the technology gaps or issues you need addressed? And just thinking about it from a venture capital perspective, where would you like more investment dollars on technology, or is it people and process that are more of the gaps for you?
I would say it's not one thing, it's very my head developer or engineer always says there's always a caveat, right? So in
Yep.
this case, there's always like it's very degree of complexity. So there's technical challenges, of course, which are huge, right? How do you really make this a technology that's it can fit into your ecosystem and work with many of the other platforms in my case, right? So technology challenges there. There's data challenges, right? It's large and large amounts of data. How do you build something that is going to move at the speed of our business? We work at E.L.F speed. So for me, it's really important that whatever I bring in can actually, move fastly for me. And then there's ethical challenges. Like if we think about we're grounded in our purpose, E.L.F
Mhm.
is for every eye, lip, face, and skin concern. I cannot discriminate, right? So
Mm.
how do I make sure that the models that I'm building are ethically, right, that we're serving the consumer the right color, shade, matching, and so forth? And we really want to make sure that we're very sensitive to that. And of
Mm.
course, nice bow on top is security and privacy. Like that's always
Yeah.
a concern as a public company. So are you, really sort of building, like for me, I would never even consider, prototyping or doing something that already inherently might have security concerns around it. So I think therein lies like a little bit of, sort of thing, a hat that I have to play there. And then of course, one that I know my employees are concerned about. So framing of how you bring this into the organization
Mm.
is, are you doing this to get rid of jobs? And the answer is
Yeah.
no, right?
Yeah.
You make sure your smartest people are as effective as possible, and you're actually making their jobs easier. So the framing of that is so, so important as well.
Yeah, that's a really good leadership point to make. So, just in closing, I want to ask the question: what's a generative AI takeaway? And maybe a way to prompt this question is, if you had to tell Grandma what is generative AI, how would you describe it for common language? And it sounds like you've been doing a lot of internal education as well. Just curious, some sound bites here you might have. So,
Yeah, I would say it's like a magic 8 ball, right?
hmm,
But it is an all-knowing magic 8 ball. But instead
hmm,
of giving like vague answers, it's actually giving you some precise information and answers, depending on what you're asking, right?
hmm,
So I do think for me, I really think it is like that magic 8 ball in some sorts, because you don't know what's happening in some cases with the algorithms, but you are testing and learning and training them to get better and better. So the more you engage with it, the more fine-tuned it is with what you're looking for. I think, it could be of assistance and something that's really essentially going to improve the broader quality of the work as an individual and as a business. It can serve in many new revenue streams, and as well as, new ways to engage with their consumers.
yeah, yeah, that's awesome. So I'm really pleased to have you as a guest today. So appreciate Ekta Chopra, the Chief Digital Officer here at E.L.F. Just a fascinating background. Appreciate your opportunity to share with us today. Thank you for being part of the Mayfield CXO the Future podcast series.
Thank you, Gamil.